Greetings to all of you. Today I want to talk about the upcoming full moon on May 12th. But before I pull up that chart and talk about the energies of this upcoming full moon, remember that this full moon is the fruition. It's the coming into fullness of the lunar cycle that started with the new moon on April 27th. And let me just briefly remind you of the energies of that new moon. Let me show you the chart. As you recall, the new moon on April 27th was with the sun and moon at 7 degrees of Taurus in this powerful T square with Mars and Pluto. Remember that Mars and Pluto have been in this opposition with each other within a 5-degree orb, with Mars in Leo, Pluto in Aquarius since April 18th. They continued in that 5-degree orb until May 7th. And this is that powerful combination that is about how are we reconfiguring our understanding of power. Pluto is the planet of transformation and that higher understanding of power. And Mars, how do we act and express ourselves in the world? So, as I talked about in that new moon video, I see this powerful opposition as guiding us to reconfigure our understanding of power. As we are moving out of the Kali Yuga, we are moving out of this 5,000-year period of patriarchy and power over paradigms. In that context of being in that paradigm of power over and separation, we've come to define power as how we have control over ourselves, over others, over the environment. That power becomes that way of mastery, of conquest, of control. And power is about competition in order to succeed, to be the best, to have the power and control over others. Sadly, this paradigm of power has led to our experience as humanity of being close to ultimate self-destruction. It's led to war, it's led to extensive suffering on the planet, and it comes from this deeper sense of a lack of power and control, such that we try to assert ourselves, to feel in control, to fend off our fear of vulnerability, of helplessness, of powerlessness. I think this got activated and we moved into these patriarchal paradigms and paradigms of separation and power over, coming out of some climate crises as we were in the second half of the age of Taurus. So I truly believe this paradigm of power that we've been caught in across the past 5,000 years is coming from trauma, is coming from fear, and coming out of a fear of death or of being powerless, helpless in the face of powers outside of ourselves. But I think as we're exiting this Kali Yuga, we are being guided to heal from the trauma from the past, how it has been passed down from generation to generation, how it still infuses our collective consciousness in a way that we are caught in this an reenactment of the trauma on each other in a way that we are causing endless suffering for ourselves, for the planet, for each other. We are out of balance. And as I talked about in that new moon video, a new understanding of power as we move out of the Kali Yuga, as we've exited the Kali Yuga at the end of March, we're now moving into the age of Aquarius, guided by Pluto in Aquarius. guiding us to transform our sense of self and to transform that understanding of power to be empowerment within, to be aligning our actions, our will, our third chakra with the empowerment of divine consciousness, of cosmic consciousness, so that our power is about power with each other, power for each other, to move more and more into alignment with the energies of the earth and sky. As we come into harmony with the earth, with each other, with the cosmos, we understand the true meaning of power, which is that inner empowerment to be in alignment with our soul selves, in alignment with cosmic consciousness, so that our empowerment is about our capacity for creative expression that is of service to others and is an expression of beauty and harmony and power with and for each other to create a new world together. That is the deeper meaning of power as we move into the Aquarian age. So, as we're moving into this time of the full moon on May 12th, let me show you the chart. So, we've come out of this new moon, which has been very much about this theme of transforming our sense of self and understanding of power, to now Uranus is powerfully at play in this full moon, conjunct the sun, which is now at 22 degrees of Taurus, and opposite the moon at 22 degrees of Scorpio. Remember that these outermost planets, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, are the agents of transformation for us individually and collectively. They are the guides for us in this transformational process that we're in. So Pluto was powerfully active at the new moon, and now Uranus is playing a key role at the time of this full moon. And if the theme of the new moon was how do we redefine and transform our understanding of power and what the true meaning of empowerment is, I believe the theme at the time of this full moon is Uranus, truth. How do we understand the deeper meaning of truth? Uranus is that planet that cuts through illusion, that calls us into the truth of who we are, our authentic selves, and calls us collectively into that deeper understanding of truth and living in alignment with the deeper understanding of truth, which, as we see Uranus now at 26 degrees of Taurus, is how do we remember that truth is about alignment with natural law, Taurus. In this time of the patriarchal period, extending back the past 5,000 years, when we're in that power over paradigm, truth becomes what we decide it is. Truth becomes an expression of those who are in power, who then define reality and the beliefs that we adhere to and the cultural understanding of what's real, what's true. It isn't about what's in alignment with natural law, with harmony of the spheres, with that awareness that everything is interconnected and everything is interdependent. So what is true is a reflection of that. But instead, we've gotten caught in this distorted understanding of truth. As so many say about our understanding of history in the last 5,000 years, it's defined by the victors, who then write the story of the reality of our world through the lens of their power over and their conquest. So Uranus is saying, shatter those illusions. And we live right now in a context in our modern Western culture where there is so much disinformation, misinformation, illusion, delusion. There's a sense if something is repeated often enough, it becomes true. It becomes our reality. But that is all a fabrication. Uranus in Taurus is saying, shatter the illusions, delusions, that understanding of reality, and come back into truth, which is about being in alignment with the consciousness and reality of the cosmos, of the earth and sky, and what is in right alignment. What is in right alignment with natural law and the earth and cosmos, and what is in right alignment with our soul self, which holds the awareness of the truth of our authenticity, the truth of who we each are, of who we each truly are. So, as we're in this full moon and the sun is opposite the moon in Scorpio, it is a time to do that deep dive, Scorpio, into our own inner awareness, inner reality, to come into more clarity about the truth of who we are individually and collectively. And I think it's interesting that the asteroid Hygeia is conjunct Uranus, the asteroid Juno conjunct the moon. As we come into that deeper understanding of truth, it changes how we relate to our bodies and our health. It's guiding us into more truth about health issues on the planet. It's also guiding us into more truth in our deeper, intimate relationships. Juno in Scorpio. It's also significant that this full moon is in aspect with the North Node, which is conjunct Ceres and Saturn, guiding us to be in right relationship and in our truth in alignment with natural law and how we relate to the earth, and then the structures that we are creating out of that deeper mystical awareness, Pisces, of the oneness of all that is and the consciousness of all that is. And if we look at some of the other Kuiper Belt objects and centaurs and other dwarf planets, the ones that are highly significant at the time of this full moon are that Nessus is conjunct the North Node. And remember that that is the healing centaur that is known, as Melanie Reinhardt would say, by that phrase, the buck stops here. How do we clear and heal that ancestral trauma that has led us into these patterns of imbalance, of separation, of power over? And it's also significant that the healing centaur Chariklo is exactly squaring the sun and moon at the time of this full moon. And Chariklo is, how do we hold sacred space for each other? Chariklo in Aquarius, for how we are relating to each other as a global community, to see and hear each other clearly. Chariklo, to hold that sacred space, to be in right relationship, in healing interaction with each other. And it's significant that it's also conjunct this asteroid Pallas Athene, which is squaring the sun and moon at the time of the full moon. How do we trust our deeper knowing, our intuition to guide us through this transition to reclaim this deeper understanding of power and of truth? And how do we navigate this transition? How do we leave behind these paradigms of the past that have been so entrained within our collective consciousness across the last 5,000 years? It is so powerful from my perspective that as we're exiting the Kali Yuga, the energies of the stars and planets are so exquisitely guiding us through this time of transformation and transmutation. And I think it's beautiful that at the time of this full moon, Jupiter continues to be squaring the lunar nodes, applying to the North Node, helping us to have faith in this guidance that we're being given from Source, Pisces, from our dissolving the ways of the past, Pisces, to more open to new forms. And I talked about that theme in the powerful conjunction of Neptune and Saturn, who are conjunct in Pisces, and now towards the end of this month are moving into conjunction in the early degrees of Aries. These transpersonal planets are guiding us in how to dissolve those old beliefs and paradigms, to open to new forms, new ways of seeing and being. And Jupiter in Gemini is saying, open to your faith and possibility for new beliefs, Gemini, to move back into connection with that mystical understanding of the oneness of all that is, and that awareness that we are held and guided by cosmic consciousness, by the love and wisdom of the cosmos. And as we work with this full moon, with the sun at 22 degrees of Taurus, the moon at 22 degrees of Scorpio, the meaning of these Sabian symbols is for the sun at 22 degrees of Taurus. It's about how do we integrate our sense of self and the choices that we make with that understanding of nature and natural law. And the meaning of the Sabian symbol for the moon, the image is, and I love this image, a rabbit goes through a metamorphosis to become a nature spirit. A rabbit goes through this transmutational process to become a nature spirit or a fairy or an elemental being. We are being guided, moon in Scorpio, to transform our sense of self through that spiritual understanding of the oneness of all that is, to be in alignment with natural law, to come back into that right harmony and right balance with all that is. And let's look now at where this full moon is in the sky on May 12th. You can see at the time of the full moon that the moon will now be in the stars of Libra, between the scales of Libra. And remember that Libra is that energy that reminds us of that ancient understanding of Ma'at, that principle that everything is meant to be in right relationship, right balance, right harmony with all that is. So the moon in this time of transformation is guiding us how to come back into right harmony with natural law, with our alignment with our soul self, with how to live in harmony with each other again. And remember also that the scales of Libra are about those scales of Ma'at, where we put our heart on one side of the scale as we transition at the time of death, and she puts her ostrich feather, this very light feather, on the other scale. And we address whether we've lived in right harmony, right relationship with all that is, or whether our hearts are heavy and weighed down by the ways we've lived in out of balance ways of being with each other, with the earth, with all that is. So I think at the time of this full moon, it's also a time to look at where are we out of balance and what is weighing down our hearts with the trauma from the past or with the heaviness of the suffering on the earth. How do we clear that to be emanating this energy of harmony, of love, of balance, of being in attunement with the harmony of the spheres and of natural law, to be helping us all remember that and come back in to that deeper understanding of empowerment and truth and alignment with the consciousness and sacredness of all of life. The sun at the time of this full moon is in that powerful part of the sky that I've described in previous videos, where it's in what's called the stare of Cetus. We have Cetus, the whale, Perseus, the warrior, Andromeda, the princess. And both the sun and Uranus are right in that configuration. They're also moving towards conjunction with the stars of the Pleiades. And remember, as Julia Balaz and I talked about in that earlier video, Uranus is moving closer and closer into conjunction with Sedna, here close to the stars of Pleiades. But what's also significant about the time of this full moon, with Uranus at 26 degrees of Taurus, that is the point on the zodiac that is right beneath the star Algol, which is in alignment with 26 degrees of Taurus. And remember, Algol is associated in the myth of Perseus with the head of Medusa and is known in among many astrologers as the demon star. So let's talk about this. There are likely to be interpretations of this full moon with the sun and Uranus conjunct in that alignment with Algol, the demon star, that this full moon is somehow going to be a time of disruption or danger. Remember, that stare of Medusa could turn someone into stone. So let's talk about this Greek myth of Perseus and Medusa and that stare with Cetus the whale, known in Greek mythology as the sea monster. Let's unpack it and look at what is the deeper truth and meaning beneath this story. So let me start with recounting the story that is playing out in the sky related to Greek mythology. And we actually have to start with an earlier tale of Medusa as one who's committed to being of service in the temple of Athena. Medusa was this beautiful maiden who took the vows of chastity to be a priestess, to be serving Athena in her temple. However, Poseidon lusts after Medusa, rapes her in Athena's temple. Athena is outraged by this. So what does Athena do? She punishes the victim, Medusa, turning her from this beautiful maiden into a gorgon, a monster. So Medusa now is a gorgon with living serpents in her hair, ugly, terrifying, and this stare that if she looks at anyone will turn them to stone. So she has been raped and now banished from Athena's temple and made into this monster. The story with Perseus in this dynamic in the sky is that Perseus has been tasked with slaying Medusa, and he goes and finds a way to get her reflection mirrored off his shield so that he can cut off her head. He's returning in his hero's journey with this head from his conquest of Medusa when he sees Andromeda, who's been chained to the rocks and is in danger of being devoured by this sea monster. So Perseus uses the head of Medusa and her stare to point it at the sea monster, to kill the sea monster, to be able to rescue Andromeda. He then falls in love with her and they marry. So this is a story of the warrior who's on his hero's journey, who comes back with the prize and also then rescues the damsel in distress by slaying the fearsome monster. But if we go deeper into the roots of this story, Cetus the whale is not a sea monster. It's been seen across ancient times and cultures as the whale. And what do we know about the whales? Anyone who's experienced swimming with the whales, as I have, or has studied the whales for decades, like Joan Ocean and others, you know that they're these beings of high frequency, high level of consciousness, who I think hold the memories of the sea and sing a song of harmony to help us remember who we truly are, to help us remember our origins from the sea and our origins from the cosmos, to come back into balance. And Julia Balaz and I talk some about this in our earlier video. What is the deeper root of Medusa? There is a lot of research by Maria Gimbutas, the archaeologist in particular, that image of the Gorgon with the serpents traces back to much more ancient images and understandings of the serpent as one of the most ancient and powerful images of the great goddess. The serpent is this image of being in rhythm, in relationship with the earth, the capacity to go through life, death, rebirth as the serpent sheds its skin to move into a new form, the way in which the serpent is a symbol of fertility, of the power of the great goddess. It most likely come from the ancient Libyan goddess culture dating back into prehistoric times. And interestingly enough, in the 7th century BC, the Greeks came and colonized that area in northern Africa and absorbed a lot of the culture from the ancient Libyans, but morphed it into what was in alignment with their paradigms. Remember that the Greek and Roman mythology is steeped in the mythology and beliefs and paradigms of the age of Aries, where the Greeks and Romans were in their conquest of other nation states, of other peoples, to colonize them, to take their resources and their riches, but then to dominate and assert their power over. And the mythology of ancient Greece is encoded with these images of conquest, power over, the conquering warrior. And in the story of Perseus, what is slain? This more ancient image of the great goddess. Medusa, from that more ancient North African, Libyan, prehistorical understanding, was part of the ancient triple goddess, which represents the maiden mother crone, the cycles of the moon and the cycles of our life, death, rebirth. And it's likely that Medusa was associated with the crone aspect of the great goddess, that honoring of the death transition, not as an ending, but as a transmutation into a rebirth, into new ways of being. That the ancient cultures understood that death is not to be feared, it is a part of life, that our soul selves never die, but we go through these times of transformation and transmutation, of life, death, rebirth, just like the moon does in her cycles. And the plants do in the seasonal cycle. So, what we have here is Greek mythology absorbing something from this more ancient goddess culture that they've now colonized and dominated. And we see the suppression of the sacred feminine, the distortion of these more ancient images of the sacred feminine wisdom and the wisdom of the great goddess now being demonized, devalued, destroyed, and turned into something monstrous. What's also significant in this Greek story is that the destroyed, devalued, demonized energy of the sacred feminine, Medusa, is now used to destroy the whale, the symbol of the wisdom of the deep, of the sacred feminine wisdom that is our source, the source of our life on this planet, the source of all of life in the galaxy. So the sacred feminine symbols are being used against each other to destroy and suppress those energies as we're moving into the patriarchal period in the age of Aries, into those patriarchal power over paradigms. And what you see in Andromeda in the story is this vulnerable, weak woman in distress now being rescued by the warrior. So, in our relationships with each other in that patriarchal paradigm, men are in the positions of power, and women are either demonized if they're holding that sacred feminine wisdom empowerment, or are seen as weak and vulnerable and needing to be under the care and protection of the male warrior, the male in the power position. And we see this play out with many of the images of the sacred feminine across the patriarchal period. The devaluation and demonization of the serpent, one of the most ancient images of the great goddess. And I've talked a lot about that whole archetype of Lilith coming out of the sacred temples of the age of Taurus being increasingly devalued, demonized, until at the time of the Inquisitions, the burning times, many of the women who were retaining that understanding of sacred feminine wisdom and empowerment, the healers, teachers, herbalists, were burnt at the stake and called Liliths. So as we see this sun and Uranus conjunct in that part of the sky, I think Uranus is saying, look at the deeper truth here. Let's shatter the illusions. Let's set ourselves free from these patriarchal paradigms and beliefs that are deeply encoded in Greek and Roman mythology and now embedded in our psyches across these generations and thousands of years of the patriarchal period. Uranus is calling us into that deeper understanding of truth. What is true? What is real? What is real is the alignment with natural law and the reality that our earth and sky and cosmos are a part of this consciousness that has birthed us, that is nurturing us, that is guiding us, that is the emanation of the love and wisdom of the cosmos and the sacredness of all of life, that deeper understanding and truth of the harmony of the spheres. And when we understand that deeper reality, then we can come back into alignment within ourselves. We can remember who we truly are and come back into alignment with our soul self that has never forgotten that connection with Source, that meaning of being in right relationship and harmony with the sacredness of all of life. In such a profound way, the earth As she's in her changes and in her transformational process, the sky, as it's guiding us with these movements of the planets in their relationship with the stars, the cosmos is supporting us in leaving behind the Kali Yuga, the time of forgetting, the time of imbalance, the time of destruction, power over, war, suffering, to bring us back in to a time of healing and remembrance and transformation. If we look around us at the world right now, we see this increasing disparity between the rich and the poor. We see increasing war and violence and power over paradigms as they're in their last gasp at that effort for control. But if you look at those in these positions of power, you can tell, you can feel there is no real joy in that. It's coming out of, and I think this is some of the tragedy, that these paradigms of the Kali Yuga, of the patriarchal period, were triggered by trauma, are coming from a place of PTSD and fear of death. So our addiction to power, to consumerism, to materialism, to wanting to have the illusion of control is a way of trying to assuage an inner emptiness and despair and fear of death, fear of our disconnection, fear of each other, fear of the earth and sky, fear of the demon star. As we can heal and release that fear and trauma from the past, Uranus can support us in setting ourselves free to realize the truth has always been there. It's always been there. It's always within us. Our soul selves have never forgotten. And when we're in that alignment, when we're singing our soul song in harmony with the spheres, when we're understanding that meaning of power as empowerment in alignment with our soul self, in service to the energies of creativity and consciousness, in alignment with the harmony of the spheres, then we know that true inner peace, joy, and fullness and authenticity of being. That is when we find that sense of joy and peace. And when we can release these distorted, destructive patterns that have not brought us peace or joy, that have actually perpetuated this lineage of trauma and fear and pain and destruction. And then we can come back in to that deeper understanding of what it means to live in that awareness of the sacredness of all of life and the truth of natural law, the truth of the harmony of the spheres. And then we live in joy, authenticity, creativity, in peace, and in that expression of our own uniqueness as part of the expression of the creativity of the cosmos. This is what we're capable of. This is what we're being guided back into. This is how we as a community co-create this new world together. So as we experience this full moon, release your fear of Algol as the demon star. Remember her deeper meaning. She is a symbol of the ancient sacred goddess and the sacredness of the serpent, the wisdom of the sacred feminine, guiding us back into remembering, guiding us back into that knowledge and understanding of the cycle of life, death, rebirth, to remember that our soul selves are infinite and that this experience on this earth plane in this incarnation and experience of mortality can be a joyful experience of our fractal expression, of our unique creativity in this moment, in this time, in the cosmos. May we support each other in releasing these paradigms of the past, in coming into that deeper knowledge of power, that inner empowerment in alignment with the truth of the cosmos, and lighten our hearts, open to joy and peace and creativity and beauty and love, and move beyond fear, beyond this quest to fill the inner emptiness, to calm the despair, to come back to joy and co-create a new world together. Blessings and love to all of you. Blessed be.